Hey everybody, welcome back to Nuvino's channel, and today we look into why your bundle might be bigger than it has to be. And we find out methods how you can change that. Ready? Here we go. Performance is of course a very crucial topic for every web application out there, especially for public facing ones, but also for the applications that are used internally, because nobody likes to download megabytes of extra data or wait for requests that are being slow, etc, etc. So in this video, we'll take a look at the Vite application, right? It doesn't matter if you use Vue, Nuxt, React, Svelte, etc, etc. As long as it's based on Vite, this will work. And we'll see how we can reduce some bundles. And of course, this application is not as minimal as possible because we want to have a real world application we can test it on. So we dive into one. Let's take a look. The application we have a look at, it's called IT Tools. It is quite big functionality wise, offers a lot of various pages of functionalities from like token generation over to like one-time passwords, given device information, etc, etc, Markdown to HTML, you name it. And the best part of it is it's open source, right? So we can just take a look at GitHub and see that this has 33,000 stars, so that's quite a bit. And it is based on Vue, it has a Vite config, so we're kind of ready to go for it. So after cloning and installing the dependencies, we are good to go. And the first thing you have a look is, okay, what's going on here? We see Vite config as mentioned before, so we know there are quite a few things in here. We see Vue, Vue.itn is used, Vue.jsx as well, it's interesting. CSS, auto imports, icons, there is naive UI being used. It is a PWA as well, supports Markdown, SVG loaders, etc. Okay, that looks pretty reasonable at first. That's good to go, we're good here. The package JSON itself is interesting though as well, because if you see, there are a lot of dependencies because of all these different functionalities that are, well, I would say quite siloed. Like every page has a certain point and idea. And to get a look how this actually all works together, we want to build our application. But actually we want to build our application with a twist here, so to say. So we don't run just like a pnpm build or something. No, instead we use pnpm DLX and we use the Vite bundle analyzer package. That itself will install the rollup plugin for it, and we get a nice chart. So let's run this. And of course, I don't want to keep you waiting here. So we see you when everything generated. And here we go. We have the generated file, and this is a tree map chart, so to say. So we see all the different colors here, all the different boxes are chunks. So our JavaScript files that were generated from the Vite build itself. And you can do this with your own application as well. Either if it's plain Vite, you can just run the command shown. It's also in the description once again. If you use Nuxt, for example, then you could just run pnpm nuxt analyze. There's a built-in command for that to do that. Now, interestingly, we have to take a look at what all these chunks are doing, and we see quite some big ones. I mean, the whole application JavaScript-wise is broadly 4.92 megabytes and rendered, so like non-text compressed 23.25 megabyte, which is huge. It's a lot. Also, when you take a look, always make sure to choose the broadly toggle. At least that's my preferred way, because that's what the user will actually download when visit your site. And if you have enabled the broadly text compression, but that's default nowadays. If not, there are ways to check that for your site too. Now, we want to take a look at the entry chunk first, because the entry chunk is the JavaScript that has to be downloaded from the user, no matter which site they actually visit. So, of course, here, if we improve things, the perf gains are the biggest. So we really should do that. And to identify, we could either have a look in the indexed HTML that was generated from our Vite build, or commonly it's one of the biggest chunks. So here, though, the biggest chunks is as it's text diff, because it pulls in a whole Monaco editor, right? What's VS Code based on as well. Or also here, this MAC address lookup just pulls in a lot of JSON from an IEEE database. So these are not the entry chunks because they're not needed for every page, luckily. So we have this index 52dd6a5c chunk here, and this is a good candidate. First of all, index is always a good indicator that this is the start chunk. And then if we take a look at what's in here, we see, for example, Vue's runtime core. And of course, we know that, well, Vue's runtime core should run before anything else starts, because otherwise, how would you use the framework, right? So this is a good thing to start. Of course, we can take a look at other chunks as well, but I think for this video, we'll limit ourselves on this specific chunk, just because the gains are the biggest. And what do we actually look for in this chunk? Now we see all the libraries, right? All the files that are pulled in, and we are looking for maybe outdated libraries, duplicates, things that we can easily replace, maybe things that are not tree shakeable, or things that just belong to one page and are loaded in the core, so in the entry chunk, while they wouldn't need to. Let's take a look how we would find these things. Now, if you have a look, we see these are mostly dependencies as they're in the node modules PNPM folder originally. And we see things like naive UI as the UI library, the S module build is pulled, so that's great. We see a few libraries like view router, view draggable, where you might argue that this might not be a good idea to put them in the core itself. But what caught my eye is Lodash here. And actually there is a great list from the ES tooling repository called module replacements. And in here you have a README, right? This is from the E8E community, so shout out there. You have a README which modules could be replaced with more lightweight versions or are fully outdated in general. There's even a plugin called ES plugin depend that you can use to just detect it automatically, so you don't have to go hand by hand through that. But if we take a look at the README here, then we see, for example, Axios, you could use the native fetch API, or if you want to have a nice wrapper around that, then you can use ofetch or KY. Ofetch, for all the Vue Nuxt users, might be well known there. There are a couple of ESLint plugins, Chalk, Deep Equal, etc., etc. But one of the things besides jQuery that caught my eye here as well is that Lodash and underscore are in this list, mainly because you don't really need them. They are not necessary. Because, well, first of all, Lodash itself, hardly tree shakeable. There are extracted versions, but they're not maintained and deprecated. They're not updated. Some of them have actual security issues, so that's bad. And same with some custom Lodash builds. And we don't want it, of course. On the other hand, how realistic is that you can just replace Lodash everywhere? Depends on your application. I usually don't have them in my apps, but if you have like a big legacy application, there is a good chance that Lodash is in there. But going back to the tree chart map here, or tree map chart, the weirdest part is that you have both Lodash itself here, Lodash 4.17.2.1, and Lodash ES up here, right? So you have 2 times Lodash, while ideally you have none. And the ES version at least is tree shakeable, so that's great. But what you actually want is none of them, or at least just one for the start. But how do we figure out where these packages actually come from? Well, let's have a look. And commonly what I like to do when using PNPM, I just type PNPMY Lodash ES, for example. So I see where the ES Lodash version is installed. And here we see naive UI, one of the project's dependencies, is using Lodash ES. So there is no way around it unless that dependency would update and say, okay, I don't really need that. To be fair, there are not many use cases in naive UI for that, so there might be a chance to get it removed in a future version, but that's out of scope for here. So now the question is why Lodash isn't here. And here, okay, we have a way bigger list for that. Funnily, all the yellow ones, they can be ignored for now because these are dev dependencies. There it is, let's say, more or less okay to use it because it doesn't have any big implications in terms of runtime performance. Ideally, they also would use Lodash, but well, we don't live in an ideal world and we focus on what we have here. So interestingly, naive UI that we've just seen also loads the normal Lodash. And this is weird to say the least. That's very strange. So what's going on there? And to figure this out, we use a site called npmgraph.js.org. Here we just put in naive UI to see if this is actually correct, and it will generate the graph, the dependency graph. And actually we see naive UI here and Lodash ES down there and Lodash right under it. So it is correct. It is very strange. So might be good to figure out why exactly. And this is just a sidetrack, by the way, but this is still important. Let's take a look at the source of truth on GitHub here. The easiest to do is we just search for Lodash and see what comes out here. So we have Lodash ES configured. We use a lot of Lodash ES here, it seems. Here's a replacement for Jest. That's quite interesting. I mean, we can have a look at that real quick and see, okay, there's a mapper to say, please use, instead of Lodash ES, just use normal Lodash because, well, Jest and ES modules have some pain points, right? And that's why people use Vite mostly, among other reasons, but this is one big point. We see more Lodash ES, Lodash ES, Lodash ES. That's great. Okay, fine. There's the English changelog saying fix ESM format files are importing Lodash rather than Lodash ES. Great, because the ES version is tree shakeable at least. Okay, we're good, we're good. Here we go. Lodash. And that's from script postbuild gen web type. So this is from a script. that's executed. So that should be a def dependency then. And on page 2, pre-CJS build, same idea. They just replace Lodash with Lodash to make CJS happen. And another build script, I assume. Yeah, this could also be replaced with Lodash, for example. And that's it. So quite unnecessary to define Lodash as a dependency. Luckily, because it is not used at runtime, it doesn't have implications for our script itself, but we don't want to have that installed and indicated as dependency. So issue and maybe PR coming, but back to our code. Well, the application, right? It's not my code, I didn't write it. Now that we know that the EVUIs, Lodash is not a problem, we also have Lodash in our own package JSON actually. So here, we've seen it before, we have Lodash for 1712, and we definitely don't want to. Ideally, just use Lodash ES here for now, or no Lodash at all. So we might have to reinstall dependencies in a bit. And then Figway is also using Lodash. That's some kind of configuration library, but this is on 1.2.0 and we can bump it and update that. So that will also be alright after we do a little bit of magic. Now, interestingly, we should have a look where Lodash is actually used. So we can just search for Lodash or just like from Lodash, that might be easiest. And here we see it doesn't have that many occurrences, but we always see the pattern import underscore from Lodash. And this is kind of a pain point because easy fix would be to say, you know what, replace Lodash with Lodash ES and you're done. But actually, not really, because then it's still not tree shakeable and just import everything from Lodash ES, which is not good. So what's the plan here? The easiest. Well, first of all, we do the replacement from Lodash to Lodash ES, right? So then the code would look like this here, import underscore from Lodash ES. And then we would find out, okay, why is this used? For example, here it's used for capitalize and a big chain, right? And then we would replace these and migrate them over step by step. Now, of course, I will spare you from that because why would you take a look at me migrating that step by step? There are 43 occurrences. So we're back when this is done. Another thing we do in the meantime is also bumping Figway because the newest version does not use Lodash anymore. Big thumbs up. So let's do that and be right back here. All right, and we are back, and the amount of Lodash ES usage has been reduced drastically because a lot of things you can just refactor to not use Lodash at all. I mean, there's even a dedicated page for that called you may not need Lodash underscore. And it's absolutely correct because the usage was pretty wild. A lot of things are just available in native JavaScript, or you can build it in a couple of lines. You don't need the library and all the underlying functionalities. And yes, I've moved to dark mode for your eyes. No problem at all. But things like, okay, join, we have this natively, this is available. It's all good. You can just go for it. And actually, one of the funniest cases of using Lodash was this file, the format transformer, where underscore from Lodash was just used to call underscore identity. So the refactor here was pretty easy by saying, okay, if we take a look, transformer is a function, string returns a string, and by default it's identity. So it is just this. Or of course, if you do it with TypeScript, then we just do a string here and we're good to go. So for that, you definitely do not need Lodash. All right, and after rebuilding and taking a look at the new chunk, we now see that this entry chunk is now only, still quite big, but only 527 kilobyte with Broadly. Previously here, it was 597. So we shaved off, well, a good 70 kilobytes here. And I mean, this is mainly the size of Lodash itself here, because all the other things are just coming from Lodash ES or being removed as well. So that is pretty great. Big plus. Now let's work with this chunk further and have a look what else we could take a look at and remove. Because a few things like sortable.js and viewdraggable, the question would be, do you really need them like globally around? In this case, we should have a look where viewdraggable is around. My first assumption would be like, okay, let's take a look at the plugins and see what's here. So we have I18Anis plugin, needs to be there before, it's fine. The EVUI to create it, yeah, that's possibly way to go. And plausible itself to track analytics. And that seems reasonable, but here, weirdly, there is no actual sortable and sortable.js or viewdraggable. They're like viewdraggable is depending on sortable.js, so that doesn't make a big difference. So if you take a look at the home page, here though, we see draggable directly. And this is actually another thing that's quite interesting in this application. So here we see there's just one home page and about page, and the rest is just 4.4 is an arrow page. It is quite interesting that there are no other pages, but in a way that makes sense because these are programmatically generated. If we have a look at the router.js file here, we see we import like tools and config, And then we have tools routes, some redirects, and they are just injected down here. But what's weird is that the homepage component is actually not lazy loaded. So I would also say, hey, come on, let's just reload, lazy load, not reload, that component here. Because if we once again have a look here in our source folder, and then the pages, we have home.page.view. I don't know why about doesn't have a .page.view, but we can leave it at that for now. And then we make sure that, okay, if people never visit the homepage itself, because they might just go straight away to one of the tools, then they don't have to download the link. I think this would be very reasonable and would also make our entry chunk much smaller. Now, for the homepage, yes, you need to download the JavaScript, of course, but for all the other pages, which people might have bookmarked or come from Google, etc., that's not the case anymore. So that's why code splitting is so important, and that's why there's a great option ViewRouter to do that, and Nuxt is doing it automatically per page. And of course, we started the build process with the bundle, analyzer, and visualizer again. So after this is done, here we see 24,000 modules transformed. Might be also a good case to speed it up a bit with something like roll down Vite. Then we eventually get a temporary HTML file that can be used. Click on that, and then we see the tree map chart that we've seen before. We'll jump into that in a bit. This is basically how you use the tool. You can also use the, as I mentioned, the rollup plugin, which also works with the Vite plugin straight away, and add that to your plugins or use a command of your framework of your choice. So here we have it. We have temp, etc., etc. If we take a look at that in VS Code, we see this is just HTML loading the whole thing from the Vite bundle visualizer. So let's have a look what it says now. And here we have our wonderful newly generated files. Now we can take a look at our index chunk again. You see that the hash changed here because the content hash, so everything after the dash and before the JS is based on the content of the file. And now if we have a look, actually it got smaller, 469 kilobyte, right? Before it was 527, and at the very beginning we had 597 kilobyte broadlead. So we basically reduced this by over 120 kilobytes, 130 even, something like that, just by, well, replacing Lodash because it was a duplicate, and by moving out the homepage, because here you can't see anything of view draggable or solvable anymore. So with most of the other pages that you visit, you won't have to download that JavaScript, of course, on the very first run. Otherwise, it might be still there. Now, these are two of the big improvements that you can definitely do. Take a look in your own applications as well, because you might have a couple of these too. Take a look at some of the dependencies, maybe also install the SNet plugin depend. And yeah, if you're interested in more performance tips, let me know in the comments. Also, as usual, open for suggestions for topics. I hope you can also shrink down your bundle for a bit. And I'm out doing the PRs to remove some of the dependencies, because the install size also matters a lot here. Last but not least, also big shout out to E18E if you're interested in more performance stuff. They do a lot of cool things and improving the ecosystem in various ways. So it's very easy and low entrance barrier to get in there. You can just continue. You can just start and contribute. It is very, very straightforward. So if you're interested and also want to learn a few things, I can highly recommend that. And I can also highly recommend it to watch all the videos on this channel and write down all the things on your mind in the comments. I hope to see you next Friday as usual. And until then, happy hacking.